Hey guys, today we're going to dive headfirst into a journey so peculiar, so utterly unexpected, that you might just find yourself questioning everything you thought you knew about luxury. Forget your cashmere. Dismiss your Egyptian cotton. We're talking about a fabric that once dictated empires, launched global trade routes, and was guarded with the kind of ferocity usually reserved for nuclear codes. Imagine, if you will, the softest caress against your skin, a whisper of coolness, a shimmer that catches the light in a way no other material quite can. You're picturing silk, aren't you? Now here's your cheeky reality check. This ethereal substance, this benchmark of opulence, originates from a creature that, frankly, looks like a tiny, extremely hungry and somewhat bewildered caterpillar. You probably won't survive this, not because it's dangerous, but because your mind is about to be utterly blown by the sheer, improbable elegance of it all. Empress Leizu's serendipitous discovery. Explore the legendary origins of silk in ancient China, attributed to Empress Leizu. You find yourself transported, not by a magic carpet, but by the gentle hum of cicadas, to an ancient Chinese garden, roughly 4,700 years ago. The air is thick with the scent of blossoming magnolias and the subtle, earthy aroma of mulberry trees. The sun, a warm, benevolent orb, casts long, lazy shadows across polished stone pathways. You're here, quietly observing, as Empress Leizu, wife of the mythical Yellow Emperor, sits beneath the leafy canopy of a mulberry tree, enjoying a moment of serene contemplation. Her tea, a fragrant, steaming brew, rests beside her, perhaps in a delicate jade cup. It's a peaceful scene, the kind of moment you'd capture for a live laugh-love scroll if such things existed back then. But then, a small, unassuming object tumbles from the branches above, landing with a soft plop directly into her teacup. You watch as tiny ripples expand across the surface of the tea. It's a cocoon, pale and oval, an innocent-looking little package, no bigger than your thumb. Most people, yourself included, would probably just sigh, fish it out with a spoon, and maybe mutter something about nature's slightly inconvenient timing. But Empress Leizu, clearly a woman of discerning curiosity and perhaps a touch bored with royal duties, does something different. As the cocoon soaks in the warm tea, she observes it closely. The heat softens the sticky sericin, the natural glue that holds the silken threads together. With gentle fingers, she begins to prod the now loosened cocoon, trying to remove it. And that's when it happens. Instead of a solid lump, a single, incredibly fine, incredibly long thread begins to unwind. It pulls and pulls, seemingly endless, shimmering softly in the sunlight. You can almost hear her gasp, a soft intake of breath as the truth of this serendipitous moment unfurls before her. It's like discovering that your old sock drawer, if pulled just right, could actually be an infinite supply of designer scarves. Your tea is ruined, of course, but you've just stumbled upon the birth of an entire industry. This, dear listener, is the mainstream historical fact we're seeking. The legendary origin of silk is attributed to Empress Leizu, circa 2700 BCE, after a silkworm cocoon fell into her teacup, revealing its precious thread. She is often called the silkworm goddess, and frankly, she earned it. Imagine the sheer ingenuity required to look at a squiggly worm, then at its protective casing, and think, aha! Fabric, it's like looking at a sheep and thinking, yep, that fluffy cloud, that's my next sweater. Except, with more steps and significantly less bleeding. From that moment on, Empress Leizu became obsessed. She diligently studied the silkworms, those humble bombyx mori larvae, Discovering their diet of mulberry leaves was essential, their life cycle fascinating, and their cocoons, well, pure gold. She taught her court ladies how to rear the worms, how to carefully unwind the delicate filaments, and how to weave them into luminous cloth. This was not just a hobby. This was an industrial revolution cloaked in ancient silks. For centuries, the Chinese held this secret fiercely, with punishments for revealing the methods of sericulture ranging from exile to execution. Imagine getting the death penalty for smuggling a few caterpillar eggs. That's how valuable this secret was. Now for a quirky tidbit, because history isn't just about emperors and empresses. The silkworm, Bomix mori, is perhaps the most completely domesticated animal on Earth. Think about it. They literally cannot survive in the wild. Their ancestors were probably wild, but centuries of human intervention have made them dependent. They can't fly, they're blind, and they have lost the ability to live without human care. They just eat, spin, and do their silky magic. It's like if our house cats evolved to be so utterly useless at hunting that they'd starve without us opening a can of tuna. Truly, they are the ultimate in high-maintenance livestock. And to think, for a single silk robe, you'd need the threads from thousands of these little, helpless, incredibly productive creatures. It's a lot of work for a fancy outfit, even if you're a royal. Now, while the legend of Empress Leizu is a beautiful and enduring tale, historians still argue whether her discovery was a singular, definitive event, or if it represents a distillation of centuries of gradual observation and experimentation by many nameless individuals. Was it truly a lightning bolt of genius in a teacup, or merely the culmination of millennia of human curiosity and environmental interaction? Regardless, her name has become intrinsically linked with this profound leap in human innovation. You close your eyes, and you can almost feel the smooth, cool silk that changed the world, born from a simple insect and a curious empress, sipping her tea beneath a mulberry tree. You trace the edge of a leaf, its deep green surface surprisingly soft, almost velvety. A whisper-thin hum fills the air around you, a sound not unlike a tiny, very hungry orchestra tuning up. And then you see them. Microscopic specks, no larger than an eyelash clipping, stirring on the leaf. They are here, thousands of them just hatched, and their sole purpose is consumption. You are standing, metaphorically speaking, in the nurseries of empire, the unassuming cradle of future luxury. And if you were a mulberry leaf, you'd probably have about 3 days to live, tops. These aren't just any tiny caterpillars. These are Bomix mori, the domestic silkworm, and their peculiar journey begins right here, with this specific magical leaf. From the moment they emerge from their pinhead-sized eggs, these minuscule beings are driven by an insatiable hunger. Imagine a newborn baby, but instead of crying for milk, it just keeps gnawing, growing, shedding its skin, and gnawing some more. That's your silkworm, their primary mission, to devour the leaves of the white mulberry tree and only the white mulberry tree. It's not just a preference, it's a biological imperative. This isn't like you picking between pizza or pasta for dinner. For them, it's mulberry or bust. Try feeding them oak leaves or lettuce, and they'll politely, or perhaps not so politely, if silkworms had manners, refuse, eventually withering away. It turns out, those mulberry leaves contain specific alkaloids and proteins that are absolutely essential for the silkworm's development, and crucially, for the production of the lustrous silk filament. It's their superfood, their magic elixir, the secret sauce to their future textile glory. Without it, there's no silk. No glorious robes, no shimmering banners, no secret trade routes built on glistening threads. Just a lot of very disappointed, very tiny, very dead caterpillars. As they gorge themselves, these worms grow at an astounding rate. They can multiply their body weight by over 10,000 times in just a few weeks. Think about that for a second. If you, a fully grown human, gained 10,000 times your weight in a month, you'd be a small mountain of a person, probably needing a very, very large bed. Silkworms, thankfully, manage this feat with a little more grace, albeit with frequent costume changes. Every few days, they enter a state called a sleep, where they become lethargic and cease eating. This is their moment of metamorphosis, their mini-reboot. They shed their old, tight skin, emerging larger and more vibrant. They go through 4 of these sleeps, or molts, over a period of about 20 to 30 days, each time shedding the skin that has become too snug for their expanding bodies. After their 4th molt, they become fat, plump, and translucent, their skin stretched taut with the promise of what's to come. Their digestive systems have been hard at work, converting all those thousands of devoured mulberry leaves into something truly extraordinary. Deep within their bodies, 2 specialized glands, running almost the entire length of their insides, are doing their heavy lifting. These are the silk glands. They secrete a liquid protein called fibrin, which is essentially the raw material for silk. Surrounding this fibrin is another protein, sericin, which acts like a natural gum, binding the 2 strands of fibrin together as they emerge. When the silkworm is ready, it finds a comfortable spot, usually a twig or a corner in its rearing tray, and begins to spin. It's a hypnotic process, watching them. Their heads sway in a figure-8 motion, rhythmically extruding 2 continuous filaments of fibrin from spinnerets located on their mouths. As the liquid silk hits the air, it hardens almost instantly. The sericin, that gummy outer layer, helps the 2 fibrin strands stick together, creating a single, unbroken thread. This isn't some rushed job. This is a masterpiece of natural engineering. The silkworm spins continuously for 3 to 8 days, creating a cocoon that can contain a single, continuous strand of silk up to a mile long. Yes, you heard that right, 1 tiny worm, 1 mile of thread. It's an efficiency model that puts most human factories to shame. The purpose of this meticulously crafted cocoon, from the silkworm's perspective, is protection. Inside, the larva will transform into a pupa, and eventually, if left undisturbed, into a magnificent, if somewhat clumsy, white moth. This moth, having served its purpose, would then secrete an alkaline liquid that dissolves a hole in one end of the cocoon, allowing it to emerge. And this, dear listener, is where the ancient Chinese, with their keen eye for practical application, made a crucial, if somewhat brutal, discovery. If the moth emerges, it breaks those precious mile-long threads into hundreds of useless short segments. So, to preserve the integrity and length of the silk filament, the cocoons had to be harvested before the moths emerged. This involved a process called stifling, exposing the cocoons to heat, either by steaming them or baking them in ovens, effectively killing the pupa inside. It's a pragmatic, if a little sad, necessity in the grand narrative of silk. This practice, a cornerstone of sericulture, allowed for the reeling of continuous, high-quality silk threads, a mainstream historical fact that underscores the very foundations of the silk industry. Historians still argue whether the earliest silk farmers meticulously selected individual worms for breeding based on cocoon quality, or if they simply relied on sheer volume and the natural cycle. But what is clear is that the understanding of this life cycle and the precise timing of the stifling was crucial. A quirky tidbit. Some ancient texts suggest that the earliest silk producers would even listen for the faint, scratching sounds of the pupa within the cocoon, using this auditory cue to determine the perfect moment for stifling before the moth could begin its destructive escape. Imagine a whole industry relying on tiny internal scratching sounds. This delicate balance of life, death, and exquisite fiber is the hidden engine of the silk trade. It's a story woven not just with threads, but with the relentless chewing of millions upon millions of tiny worms, all orchestrated by the humble yet mighty mulberry leaf. You can almost hear them now, still munching, still dreaming of that perfect thread. You lean in close, perhaps closer than you should, as the hum of the ancient world begins to fill your ears. A soft, rhythmic whisper that promises warmth and untold luxury. You're no longer just observing the silkworm, munching away on its mulberry leaves. You're now a silent witness to the very first moments of transformation, the shift from a tiny, fragile cocoon to a thread that would one day circle the globe. Imagine the scene. The small, glistening cocoons, now complete, are gathered. Each one, a miniature masterpiece of engineering, holds a single, continuous filament of raw silk, spun with an instinctual precision that even today's most advanced machines struggle to replicate without breaking a sweat. Here's where the human touch, or rather the human genius, steps in. You watch as hands, calloused and knowing, sort the cocoons. This isn't just a simple collection, it's an art form born of necessity. The trick, you see, is to unwind that single, precious thread without snapping it. And how do they do it, these ingenious ancients, without the benefit of steam-powered machinery or even basic thermometers? You see shallow basins, carved perhaps from stone or hardened clay, filled with water, gently warmed. Not too hot, or the delicate sericin, the natural gum that binds the silk filament, will dissolve too quickly and render the thread useless. Not too cold, or the sericin won't soften enough, and the thread will cling stubbornly to itself. It's a Goldilocks problem, played out thousands of years before fairy tales were even a twinkle in anyone's eye. You're witnessing the birth of reeling, a process that even today forms the backbone of silk production. The cocoons are gently agitated in the warm water, and as the sericin softens the outer, tangled fibers, the floss are brushed away. Then, with an almost imperceptible flick of a wrist, a single thread is caught, delicate as a spider's web. But one thread, no matter how long, is simply too fine for weaving. So multiple threads, often 5 to 10, are gathered and twisted together as they are drawn from their individual cocoons. They're fed through small guides and then onto a reeling frame, forming a single, stronger strand of raw silk. It's mesmerizing, really. The rhythmic pull, the careful twisting, the steady accumulation of what will eventually become fabric. This early raw silk still feels a bit rough, almost waxy due to the remaining sericin, but even then you can sense the inherent strength and subtle sheen just waiting to be unleashed. You realize, looking at the focused faces, that mastering this delicate dance would have taken years of apprenticeship. You, dear listener, with your penchant for instant gratification, would probably not survive this part of the process without either giving up in frustration or accidentally creating a glorious, tangled mess. Once reeled, the raw silk skeins are often put through a process called degumming. This involves boiling the silk in a solution, often with ash or lye, to strip away the sericin. The transformation is immediate and remarkable. The silk loses its stiffness and waxy feel, becoming incredibly soft, lustrous, and pliable, the very qualities we associate with silk today. Imagine that first touch, millennia ago, of silk after degumming. It must have felt like touching moonlight or perhaps a cloud. Suddenly, a new material existed, unlike anything known before. It wasn't just soft. It was strong, lightweight, breathable in heat, and surprisingly warm in cold. A true wonder. But even a perfect thread needs a home. And that home was the loom. You can almost hear the rhythmic clack-clack-clack of the earliest looms, simple contraptions, certainly, but revolutionary in their impact. These weren't the automated behemoths of the industrial age. You're picturing backstrap looms, where one end of the loom is tied to a fixed object and the other to the weaver's waist, using their body tension to create the warp. Or perhaps primitive horizontal ground looms, with wooden beams and heddles moved by hand or foot. The weaving was painstaking, thread by thread, shuttle by shuttle, creating not just simple cloth but intricate patterns that whispered tales of dragons, phoenixes, and celestial beings. This careful, almost meditative process meant that every inch of woven silk was a testament to immense human labor and skill. And then came the color. While early dyes were rudimentary, think natural pigments from plants, minerals, or even insects. The Chinese quickly mastered the art of dyeing silk. Imagine the rich, earthy reds from madder root, the deep indigos from indigo plants, the vibrant yellows from pagoda tree flowers. Silk's unique protein structure allows it to absorb and hold dyes with an intensity and brilliance unmatched by other natural fibers like linen or hemp. The colors shimmered, changing with the light, making the fabric even more captivating. This ability to take on vibrant hues further elevated silk from a mere cloth to a canvas for artistic expression, and crucially, a powerful symbol. This is where the transformation into a coveted fabric truly takes hold. In ancient China, silk was not just a material, it was currency. It was a badge of honor, it was power. Initially, its use was strictly controlled, reserved for the emperor, his family, and the highest echelons of the nobility. You wouldn't find a common farmer strolling through the market in a silk tunic, unless he fancied a very swift trip to the nearest imperial dungeon. Mainstream historical fact. The earliest archaeological evidence of woven silk fragments in China dates back to the Neolithic period, around 5,000 to 6,000 years ago, found at sites like Shinyang, demonstrating its incredibly ancient roots in the region. The very texture of silk, its cool, smooth embrace against the skin, was a sensual experience available only to the elite. Imagine the rustle of a silk robe as an emperor moved, each sound a soft affirmation of his supreme authority. It draped differently, shimmered differently, felt different from anything else. It was literally woven wealth. This exclusivity fostered an immense desire for the fabric, both within China's borders and eventually beyond. The sheer labor involved in producing even a small piece, from tending the mulberry trees, to raising the worms, to reeling the threads, to weaving the fabric and finally dyeing it, made it intrinsically valuable. Here's a quirky tidbit for you. Because silk was so valuable, it wasn't just worn. It was used as writing material before paper became widespread, offering a smooth, durable surface for important documents and elegant calligraphy. Imagine writing your most profound thoughts on something as luxurious as silk. It also served as a unit of currency, particularly in trade with frontier peoples, where bales of silk could be exchanged for horses, jade, or other precious goods. So you might literally pay for your dinner with a piece of your shirt, if your shirt was made of silk, and you were on the borderlands. Historians still argue whether the earliest silk production was solely for ritualistic purposes, or quickly transition to everyday for the elite wear. But its sacred and symbolic importance is undeniable. You're beginning to understand, aren't you, why this simple thread from a worm would become such a powerful engine of human history. You stand at the ancient gates, the air thick with the scent of mulberry leaves, a soft, almost imperceptible hum emanating from within the city walls. Beyond these formidable barriers, a secret whispers, threads of pure magic spun by creatures no larger than your pinky finger. This isn't just a commodity. It's an empire's lifeblood, its most fiercely guarded treasure. You feel the weight of centuries of strict edicts, a tangible pressure that hangs in the air around the forbidden city itself. Imagine for a moment trying to smuggle something as seemingly insignificant as a few tiny silkworm eggs, or even a handful of mulberry seeds, out of this vast, watchful empire. Let's just say your travel itinerary would abruptly end, likely with a very unsoft landing. You probably won't survive this particular attempt at international espionage. For nearly 2 millennia, the entire process of sericulture, from the careful cultivation of mulberry trees and the nurturing of those voracious silkworms, to the intricate reeling and weaving of the threads, was a secret so profound, so vital, that its unauthorized disclosure was punishable by death. Not just a slap on the wrist, mind you, but a permanent, rather dramatic cessation of all future activities. It wasn't merely a trade secret. It was a state secret, guarded with a ferocity that bordered on religious zeal. The Chinese understood, with chilling clarity, the immense economic and geopolitical power that this shimmering fabric bestowed upon them. It was their golden ticket, their exclusive access to the world's most luxurious markets, and they intended to keep it that way. Picture the bustling caravans departing from the imperial cities, laden with bales of finished silk, destined for distant lands along the fabled Silk Road. Yet, amongst the mountains of shimmering fabric, you wouldn't find a single live silkworm, not an egg, not even a viable mulberry seed. Border patrols were instructed to conduct meticulous searches, their eyes trained to spot any suspicious lump, any clandestine container. It wasn't enough to simply confiscate the contraband. The carrier himself would face the ultimate penalty. It's almost comical in its severity, isn't it? Imagine a border guard, perhaps a gruff fellow named Lau, finding a tiny, almost invisible egg. "Aha!" he'd exclaim, holding it aloft with a triumphant sneer. "Caught you, you slippery little bugger! Off with your head!" All for something that looks like a speck of dust. This strict enforcement wasn't just theoretical. It was brutally practical. Imperial edicts flowed down from the emperor, reminding every official, every citizen, of the dire consequences of revealing the secret. Villages involved in silk production became almost like self-contained fortresses, their inhabitants keenly aware of the trust placed in them, and the swift retribution that awaited any transgression. They knew the value of their craft, yes, but also the iron fist that ensured their silence. It fostered a unique kind of cultural pride, intertwined with an omnipresent fear. You could feel it in the air, a quiet reverence for the silkworm, not just as a creature of sustenance, but as a silent, powerful guardian of the empire's wealth. But how do you keep such an incredibly valuable secret, for so long, from an increasingly curious and technologically advancing world? Well, part of it was geographic isolation, the vastness of the Chinese landscape acting as a natural barrier. Part of it was the sheer complexity of the process. It wasn't just about getting an egg, but understanding the entire intricate dance between worm, leaf, and climate. And a huge part of it was the severe, unwavering legal framework. It's one thing to have a trade secret in today's world, where industrial espionage often means hefty fines or jail time. It's quite another when the penalty for intellectual property theft is a swift decapitation. It certainly focused the mind, wouldn't you agree? Oh, you want to steal my secret. How about I make sure you never have a head to put it in? Historians still argue whether the Chinese truly believed the secret could be kept indefinitely, or if it was more about delaying the inevitable, maximizing their monopoly for as long as humanly possible before the rest of the world caught up. Was it a desperate clinging to power or a shrewd long-term strategy? The fact remains, for nearly 2,000 years, China held a near-absolute monopoly on silk production. The secret wasn't impenetrable, of course. Eventually, it would leak, as all secrets eventually do. But the sheer longevity of this guarded knowledge is a testament to the effectiveness of their laws, their patrols, and perhaps the pervasive sense of patriotism and fear that permeated society. They built a literal wall around their worms, and for an astonishingly long time, it held. You stand at the edge of the known world, a vast, shimmering expanse of sand and distant mountains stretching before you. The air bites with a dry chill, carrying whispers of trade winds that have, for centuries, carried only whispers of an impossible treasure. You watch, squinting, as a camel caravan, a rolling tide of humpbacked beasts laden with unimaginable wealth, slowly materializes from the heat haze. Their bells jingle a hypnotic, rhythmic mantra against the vast silence, a sound that promises riches beyond measure, but also danger. This isn't your backyard stroll to the grocery store. This is an epic journey across continents. Let's be honest, you'd probably get lost somewhere around the first sand dune, then eaten by a very polite but exceptionally hungry sandworm. It's an adventure you're experiencing from the comfort of your bed, and trust me, that's the safest place to be for this particular saga. For centuries, China's silk had been its most zealously guarded secret, a shimmering, soft power that few outsiders even knew existed, let alone how it was made. Remember how Empress Leizu accidentally stumbled upon this miracle fiber. How the silkworm, with its insatiable appetite for mulberry leaves, spun its golden cocoon, and how the ancient looms transformed those delicate threads into fabrics fit for emperors. That secrecy, remember, was enforced with punishments so severe they made a bad hair day look like a spa retreat. But secrets, especially ones this alluring, have a way of seeping out. Like a particularly stubborn stain on a pristine white tablecloth, the allure of silk proved impossible to contain within the Middle Kingdom's borders. Now imagine the world beyond China's protective mountains. To the west, empires rose and fell, their appetites growing for luxury, for things that spoke of power and prestige. And what spoke louder than the whisper-soft rustle of a silk robe, dyed in hues previously unseen, shimmering with an otherworldly luster. Word, carried by intrepid or perhaps just incredibly foolish merchants, began to spread. Not about the worms, oh no, that was still top secret, but about the fabric. About its strength, its warmth in winter, its coolness in summer, its unbelievable softness. This wasn't just clothing. It was a status symbol, a currency, a legend in woven form. And so, piece by painstaking piece, a network of routes began to form, not just one road, but a sprawling, interconnected web of paths over mountains, through deserts, and across oceans. This intricate tapestry of trails would eventually be dubbed the Silk Road. A name that, while romantic, doesn't quite capture the sheer grit, danger, and often fatal determination it took to traverse. It wasn't a single paved highway with convenient rest stops and drive-through lattes. Oh, if only. It was a brutal, often unmapped series of tracks, marked by the bleached bones of those who failed to complete the journey. Historians still argue whether the Silk Road was primarily driven by demand from the West, or by China's strategic desire to control trade and expand its influence. Was it a pull from afar or a gentle push from within? What we do know is that by the Han Dynasty, around the 2nd century BCE, the official opening of trade routes with Central Asia dramatically increased the flow of goods. Zhang Qian, a Chinese imperial envoy, is often credited with paving the way, embarking on perilous missions to the west, bringing back tales of new lands, strange peoples, and most importantly, new markets. His journeys, though initially for military alliances, inadvertently became the catalyst for one of history's greatest commercial ventures. Imagine being the person who essentially invents international shipping, only without the benefit of, ships that don't rely on camel power. The Silk Road wasn't just about silk, though silk was undoubtedly the superstar of the show, the headliner at the biggest concert on Earth. Goods flowed in both directions. China sent out silk, porcelain, spices, tea, and paper. In return, they received horses, which the Chinese coveted for their cavalry, furs, jade, gold, silver, glass, and exotic fruits. Ideas traveled to Buddhism, Islam, scientific knowledge, art forms, and even new technologies like paper-making and gunpowder eventually made their way west along these very same routes, albeit at a snail's pace. Think of it as the original slow-motion internet, where messages took years instead of milliseconds. One quirky tidbit about these journeys: camels, the quintessential beasts of burden for much of the Silk Road, weren't just transport. They were often seen as living, breathing fortresses. Their ability to go for days without water, their wide, splayed feet perfect for sand, and their general grumpy demeanor made them ideal companions. But even these hardy creatures needed breaks. Caravans often moved at night when crossing deserts to avoid the scorching daytime heat. Imagine a long line of shadowy figures, moving silently under a canopy of stars, the only sounds the soft pad of camel feet and the occasional snort. It must have been an experience that was both terrifyingly lonely and profoundly awe-inspiring. You certainly wouldn't be complaining about traffic on your morning commute then. The challenges were immense. Brutal weather, treacherous terrain, bandits, who, let's be honest, were probably just trying to pay their rent, and the ever-present threat of disease. Merchants often traveled in large caravans for protection, forming temporary communities on the move. They learned to speak smatterings of different languages, understood complex bartering systems, and developed an almost supernatural intuition for danger. Each journey was an epic in itself, a testament to human endurance and greed, all fueled by the desire for that one particular luxury item. Silk, this wasn't just commerce. It was a grand, dangerous ballet of supply and demand, played out on the world's largest stage. And it all began because a tiny worm munching on a leaf had a secret to share with the world. You remember how China kept its silken secret locked away for centuries, a treasure guarded more fiercely than dragons hoard, right? A knowledge so valuable it was worth a kingdom, perhaps even your life. Well, not everyone was content to simply admire the shimmering fabric from afar. Oh no, the lure of silk, its soft whisper promising unimaginable wealth and power, was too strong for some. Imagine, for a moment, the chill wind whipping at your face as you stand on the precipice of a dusty mountain pass. Below, the endless plains of Central Asia stretch out, a vast, indifferent ocean of land. You're not here for the view, though. You're here because you've heard whispers, hushed tales carried on the desert winds, of a fabric that feels like spun air, a secret held captive behind the Great Wall. And you, my friend, have a plan. A very, very dangerous plan. Because this wasn't just about making a quick buck. This was about breaking one of the most impenetrable trade monopolies in ancient history. You might have thought smuggling was just about hiding a few spices in your tunic, but this was the industrial espionage of its day, on a scale that would make modern corporate spies blush. The Chinese imperial courts had made it absolutely clear. Anyone caught attempting to smuggle silkworm eggs, cocoons, or even the precious mulberry seeds out of the empire faced immediate execution. No trial, no appeal, just a swift, brutal end. You probably wouldn't survive this, honestly. The stakes were so high that most sensible people simply bowed their heads and paid the exorbitant prices for the finished product. But history, bless its daring heart, isn't usually written by sensible people. One of the earliest, though perhaps apocryphal, tales tells of a Chinese princess betrothed to a Cottonese king, somewhere around the 5th century CE. Now imagine her, leaving the opulence of the imperial court, preparing for a life in a distant, dusty land. She was permitted to bring a few personal items, perhaps some cosmetics, a favorite musical instrument, or maybe a tiny, intricately carved jade trinket. But this princess, if the legend holds true, had something far more valuable hidden in her elaborate coiffure. Nestled within her towering hairstyle, secured with pins and perhaps a prayer, were silkworm eggs and mulberry seeds. A wedding gift of economic revolution. You can almost feel the tension, can't you? Every bump in the road, every curious glance from a guard, a potential disaster. Did her hair ache from the hidden cargo? Did she feel the microscopic life stirring against her scalp? A tiny secret that would soon unravel centuries of imperial control. Historians still argue whether this was a calculated act of state-sponsored technology transfer, a romantic gesture of love for her new kingdom, or just a particularly clever way for a royal bride to pack a future industry. Whatever the truth, it paints a vivid picture of the lengths to which people would go for the sake of silk. But the most famous and undeniably verified instance of this daring biological theft occurred much later, around 550 CE. Enter 2 Persian monks, or perhaps Byzantine monks disguised as Persians, depending on which ancient text you're consulting. They weren't just spiritual seekers. They were, in essence, agents of the Byzantine Emperor Justinian I, a man with a serious silk obsession and an even more serious aversion to paying exorbitant Persian middlemen. Justinian, you see, needed silk for his burgeoning empire, for the grand vestments of his court, for the dazzling mosaics of Hagia Sophia, and for the sheer prestige of it all. He was tired of China's monopoly and Persia's role as the gatekeeper, hiking up prices like it was a Black Friday sale every day. These monks, having spent time in China, observing the intricate process of sericulture, understood its secrets. They saw the mulberry trees, watched the worms munching away, and probably thought, "Hey, we could do this back home." Their plan was audacious in its simplicity, a masterstroke of stealth. They didn't need to smuggle adult worms, which are notoriously delicate and have a short lifespan. They didn't need to transport vast quantities of mulberry leaves, which would wilt and spoil. No, they needed the source, the beginning, the eggs. Silkworm eggs are tiny, no bigger than poppy seeds, and remarkably resilient. They can survive harsh conditions, lying dormant until the right temperature and humidity coax them to life. It's like carrying an entire textile factory in your pocket, only instead of gears and looms, you're carrying microscopic promises of luxury. So, these monastic spies, with their serene expressions and pious demeanor, embarked on their incredible journey. They traveled back along the perilous Silk Road, the very route that had made China's silk famous, but now they were subverting its original purpose. Can you imagine the dust in their sandals, the endless stretches of desert, the wary glances from traders and bandits? They didn't carry gold or jewels in their bags. Instead, concealed within hollowed-out bamboo canes, perhaps disguised as walking sticks or even religious relics, were the precious silkworm eggs. A few small tubes, holding the future of the Byzantine textile industry. It's a bit like hiding the blueprints for the internet in a couple of empty toilet paper rolls. Seems unassuming, but oh, the power it holds. This journey wasn't a leisurely stroll. It was a pilgrimage of subterfuge, a testament to human ingenuity and greed. They passed through countless checkpoints, through lands where discovery meant certain death. The very air must have crackled with the unspoken danger. They probably maintained a calm, meditative appearance, while inside, their hearts pounded with every creak of their bamboo canes. Perhaps they even offered a silent prayer for the welfare of the minuscule passengers within. When they finally arrived back in Constantinople, presenting their gift to Emperor Justinian, one can only imagine his relief and triumph. The dream of a homegrown silk industry was no longer a distant fantasy. It was now a microscopic reality, ready to hatch. From those few precious eggs, meticulously nurtured in the imperial gardens of Byzantium, sprang an entirely new industry. The secret was out. China's centuries-long monopoly, while not instantly shattered, began to show cracks. The whispers of silk production began to spread westward, carried not just by trade caravans, but by the very creatures that spun the thread. The world was about to change, one tiny, munching worm at a time. You feel the damp chill clinging to your robes, the air thin and sharp, carrying the scent of pine and distant mountain snow. Each step is a silent prayer, a gamble against the brutal elements of the Eurasian steppes. You're not just a man of faith. You're a man with a secret coiled in the heart of a hollowed-out cane, small enough to escape casual notice, yet powerful enough to reshape empires. This isn't your typical pilgrimage. There's no sacred shrine at the end, only the promise of golden threads. And let's be honest, if you were caught with contraband silkworms, your chances of a peaceful retirement, or, surviving at all, were basically zero. A reality check that tastes colder than the mountain air itself. You've heard the whispers, the legends of countless attempts to spirit away China's most guarded secret. Remember those daring smugglers we talked about earlier, risking everything for a single thread? This time, however, the stakes are different, the players far more cunning. It's the mid-6th century, and Emperor Justinian I, reigning from Constantinople, casts a covetous eye eastward. He sees the flow of magnificent silk into his empire, its price astronomical, its source a tightly controlled mystery. He knows its value, not just for luxury, but as a strategic asset, a diplomatic tool, and a major drain on his imperial coffers. He needs his own supply. And so, the call goes out, not to spies or merchants, but to a pair of unassuming Persian monks who have spent years journeying through the distant lands of Seer's China, as it was slowly becoming known. These weren't your average monks, content with quiet contemplation and manuscript illumination. No, these were spiritual adventurers, or perhaps, as some historians suggest, just really good at keeping secrets under their habits. They had, through their travels, observed the intricate process of sericulture, the meticulous raising of silkworms, and the reeling of their precious cocoons. They'd seen firsthand the entire delicate life cycle, from the tiny eggs no bigger than a poppy seed, to the ravenous caterpillars feasting on mulberry leaves, to the shimmering cocoons spun with such architectural precision. They understood the rhythm of it all, the sheer biological miracle that transformed a humble leaf into a thread fit for kings. Now, picture them, these two pious gentlemen, embarking on their return journey. They aren't carrying sacred relics or theological texts. Instead, nestled discreetly within hollowed-out bamboo canes are the future of Byzantine luxury, silkworm eggs, not many, mind you. Perhaps just enough to fit comfortably, each tiny speck a dormant promise of future wealth. It's an almost laughably simple plan for something with such immense geopolitical ramifications. No elaborate deception, no dramatic chases, just two men, two canes, and a whole lot of faith in God and in the resilience of insect eggs. Historians still debate whether the monks fully understood the monumental economic shift they were about to trigger, or if they just saw it as a spiritual quest to bring a valuable resource to their Christian emperor. Probably a bit of both, with a generous helping of don't get caught. Their journey was arduous, traversing mountains and deserts, facing brigands and the ever-present threat of discovery. Every border crossing would have been a heart-stopping moment. Imagine the customs official, casually eyeing their travel-worn faces, perhaps a fleeting glance at their staffs. Little did they know, they were looking at the beginning of the end of China's centuries-old silk monopoly. It's a bit like someone smuggling the secret recipe for that super-addictive fizzy drink in a hollowed-out celery stick. You'd never suspect a thing. Upon their successful return to Constantinople around 550 AD, the eggs were carefully nurtured. The monks, now turned impromptu sericulture experts, provided Justinian with the detailed knowledge of raising the silkworms and reeling the silk. The emperor, reportedly delighted, quickly established imperial silk factories, most notably in Constantinople, but also in Antioch, Beirut, and Tyre. This wasn't just about making pretty dresses. It was about national security and economic independence. Suddenly, the Byzantine Empire no longer had to rely solely on the precarious Silk Road trade or pay exorbitant prices to their Persian rivals, who acted as intermediaries in the silk trade. The impact was immediate and profound. Constantinople became a burgeoning center of silk production, its workshops humming with looms. Byzantine silk, known for its rich colors and intricate patterns, quickly gained a reputation for quality and artistry, rivaling, and in some cases even surpassing, the Chinese originals in the eyes of Western elites. This wasn't just a win for Justinian. It was a testament to the power of a tiny egg and a daring, albeit quiet, act of industrial espionage. The Chinese, naturally, weren't thrilled. For centuries, their silk had been their most potent economic weapon, a source of immense wealth and influence. They had fiercely protected the secret of sericulture, even imposing the death penalty for anyone attempting to smuggle silkworms or their eggs out of the empire. The very idea that such a vital secret could be breached by a pair of foreign monks with hollow sticks must have been infuriating, almost comically so. It was a classic oops moment on a geopolitical scale. The monopoly was broken, not with an army, but with a few hundred silkworm eggs. Who knew tiny creatures could be such a security risk? And so, the peculiar journey of silk took another monumental turn. From Empress Leizu's legendary teacup, through the guarded gates of China, across treacherous mountains and deserts, silk had finally found new homes. The Byzantine Empire's newfound ability to produce its own silk transformed the global economy of the time, shifting power balances and opening new chapters in the story of this most luxurious of fabrics. It demonstrated that even the most tightly held secrets, when faced with human ingenuity and a strong imperial desire, could eventually unravel. You can almost hear the sigh of relief from Justinian's treasury. You find yourself not in a damp Byzantine monastery, nor lurking in the shadows of a Chinese market, but amidst the shimmering opulence of a bustling souk in 9th century Baghdad. The air, thick with the scent of spices and oud, vibrates with the low hum of commerce. Sunlight, fractured by intricate latticework, dances on bolts of fabric draped over stalls, each thread catching the light like a trapped constellation. Here, silk isn't just a commodity. It's a living, breathing testament to an empire at its zenith. Remember those intrepid Byzantine monks, clutching their hollowed-out staffs filled with smuggled silkworm eggs. Well, their daring, if slightly sacrilegious, mission truly blew the doors open, not just for Byzantium, but for a whole new civilization rising in the East. After the initial foothold, the knowledge, the worms, and the precious mulberry trees began to spread like wildfire across the burgeoning Islamic caliphates. From the sands of Egypt to the sun-drenched plains of Persia, and all the way to the sophisticated courts of Al-Andalus, the humble silkworm found new homes. It was as if the universe, having kept this secret under lock and key for millennia, suddenly decided to scatter its glittering fragments across a vast, interconnected world. Imagine, if you will, the sheer logistical triumph of establishing sericulture in entirely new climates. It wasn't just about planting a few mulberry saplings. It was about understanding the meticulous needs of the Bomix Mori, those insatiably hungry little munchers. You'd need vast tracts of land dedicated solely to cultivating mulberry leaves. And let me tell you, if you were in charge of keeping millions of silkworms fed, happy, and producing perfect cocoons, you probably wouldn't survive the stress. One fungal infection, one sudden cold snap, one bad batch of leaves, and your entire year's production, and possibly your head, would be forfeit. It was a high-stakes agricultural gamble, but one that paid off handsomely. The Islamic Golden Age wasn't just about replicating what China and Byzantium had done. It was about innovation, artistry, and a cultural embrace of the material that transformed it entirely. While the initial techniques might have been borrowed, the Islamic world injected its own unique aesthetic and technological prowess. Weaving centers flourished in cities like Damascus, Baghdad, Cairo, and later, Cordoba and Granada. Master weavers, often working in state-controlled workshops or private ateliers, pushed the boundaries of what was possible with thread and loom. This era saw the rise of sophisticated patterns that moved beyond simple geometric designs. You find complex arabesques, intricate calligraphy, and stylized floral motifs adorning lengths of silk. An interesting tidbit: while figurative imagery was often avoided in religious art due to aniconic principles, textiles offered a bit more leeway, though abstract and geometric patterns remained dominant and incredibly intricate. The sheer complexity of some of these designs, often requiring multiple colors and varying thread densities, is mind-boggling even today. They weren't just weaving fabric, they were weaving poetry. Consider the Turaz textiles, for instance. These were bands of silk, often with gold or silver thread, inscribed with calligraphy bearing the name of the caliph or verses from the Quran. They were produced in royal workshops and given as gifts, worn by officials, or used as banners. This wasn't just about fashion. It was a powerful statement of authority, piety, and wealth, all woven into a single piece of cloth. Imagine receiving a robe so exquisitely crafted, so imbued with meaning, that it literally announced your status without a single spoken word. The trade networks exploded during this period. The established Silk Road, which you remember winding its way through treacherous mountains and searing deserts, saw renewed vigor. But importantly, maritime routes across the Indian Ocean and the Mediterranean also became crucial conduits for silk. Ships laden with bales of shimmering fabric sailed from ports like Basra and Suraf, reaching as far as East Africa and the Malay archipelago. Silk became a form of soft currency, a diplomatic tool, and a universal symbol of luxury across vast stretches of the known world. Merchants, often speaking multiple languages and navigating complex political landscapes, became the unsung heroes of this glittering economy. There lives a constant balance between immense profit and equally immense risk. Mainstream historical fact. During the Abbasid Caliphate, Baghdad became arguably the most important intellectual and commercial center in the world, and its silk industry was a key pillar of its economic might, attracting skilled artisans and fostering unprecedented textile innovation. Historians still argue whether the Islamic world's unique advancements in silk weaving, such as the development of certain lampas and brocade techniques, were purely indigenous innovations or sophisticated adaptations of existing Sasanian and Byzantine methods. What is undeniable, however, is the explosion of variety and artistic expression that emerged from this period. The legacy of this golden age of silk production still resonates. Look closely at many historical garments, tapestries, or even modern textile designs inspired by the Middle East, and you'll find echoes of those ancient patterns and techniques. The soft rustle of silk, once a carefully guarded secret, had now become a common language of luxury, understood and appreciated from the Atlantic to the Pacific, all thanks to a worm, a leaf, and a civilization determined to weave its own magnificent destiny. You shiver, drawing your threadbare cloak tighter around you as a gust of wind whips through the open archway of the castle's great hall. The flickering torchlight casts dancing shadows on the rough-hewn stone walls, and the air, perpetually damp and chill, carries the faint scent of wood smoke and unwashed bodies. This is your reality, if you happen to be a commoner or even a minor noble in medieval Europe. A world of scratchy wool, coarse linen, and practical, if not particularly glamorous, attire. You're always a bit cold, a bit itchy, and probably dreaming of a hot bath that won't happen for another 5 centuries. Honestly, if you were born into this era, you probably wouldn't even see silk, let alone wear it, unless you were really, really good at being born into the right family. And even then, you'd need a small fortune and a whole lot of patience. But then imagine a whisper, a rustle, a flash of something so utterly alien, so impossibly lustrous, that it seems to defy the very laws of your drab, earthly existence. This isn't the heavy, familiar drape of velvet, nor the humble integrity of flax. This is silk. And just as the Islamic Golden Age saw silk flourish in dazzling new forms and applications, a new demand was brewing to the West, an insatiable desire born from both awe and ambition. Remember how those enterprising Byzantine monks allegedly snuck silkworm eggs out of China, breaking that centuries-old monopoly? Well, their efforts, while initially bolstering the Byzantine Empire's textile industry, also served as an unwitting stepping stone. For centuries, Western Europe had only known silk as a distant, legendary commodity, arriving in meager, precious quantities along the tortuous Silk Road. It was a fabric of myth, whispered about in tales of the exotic East, often associated with saints' relics or the robes of powerful emperors. It was literally woven into the fabric of their understanding of the divine and the magnificent. Then came the Crusades. Now, before you mentally picture knights in shining armor charging valiantly, let's just say the Crusades were less a holy pilgrimage and more a grand, chaotic field trip for European nobility, often with significant shopping opportunities. When European crusaders marched into the Levant, Syria, Palestine, and Egypt, they didn't just encounter different cultures and formidable armies. They encountered silk in quantities and qualities they had never before imagined. It was everywhere. Shimmering robes on local dignitaries, intricate banners, luxurious tent linings. Suddenly, this mythical fabric was tangible, touchable, and utterly desirable. It wasn't just a rumor from Marco Polo's travels. It was a textile reality, and the knights, once content with their chainmail and wool, suddenly had a new sartorial aspiration. "My liege, I just have to get me some of that shimmering stuff." You can almost hear them murmur, perhaps while secretly trying to snag a discarded silk handkerchief. The returning crusaders brought back more than just tales of valor and religious zeal. They brought back bolts of silk, sometimes as spoils of war, sometimes as expensive purchases. These initial trickles quickly spurred a greater demand. Venice and Genoa, the ambitious maritime republics of Italy, with their burgeoning naval power and keen merchant instincts, swiftly recognized the immense profit potential. They became the primary conduits, establishing robust trade routes with the Byzantine Empire and the burgeoning Islamic textile centers. Imagine the scene in the Venetian docks. Ships laden not just with spices and jewels, but with bales of glimmering silk, the air thick with the scent of distant lands and impending wealth. It was like Christmas morning, but for extremely wealthy, fashion-conscious merchants. As silk poured into Europe, its status skyrocketed. It wasn't just a fabric, it was a declaration. To wear silk, or even to own a small silk item, was to announce your wealth, your power, and your proximity to the divine. Sumptuary laws, those wonderfully bossy regulations designed to control social hierarchy through dress, popped up like medieval mushrooms. These laws dictated who could wear what, and silk was almost exclusively reserved for royalty, high-ranking clergy, and the very wealthiest nobles. If you were caught sporting a silk doublet when your social standing only permitted homespun, you weren't just fashionable. You were basically asking for a public shaming, or worse. The idea was to keep the common folk from getting ideas above their station, and silk was the ultimate stay-in-your-lane textile. It's almost comical to think about. A medieval fashion police squad checking your cuffs for illicit silk threads. Churches, too, became vast consumers of silk. Priestly vestments, altar cloths, shrouds for relics, all were increasingly fashioned from this luxurious material. The vibrant dyes that could be achieved with silk thread, from deep ecclesiastical purples to brilliant golds and vivid reds, made it ideal for conveying spiritual majesty. Imagine walking into a dimly lit cathedral and seeing a priest's silk chasuble shimmering in the candlelight, a beacon of otherworldly splendor against the otherwise somber stone. It was a visual sermon in itself. Silk even found its way into more unusual applications. Historians still argue whether the sack of Constantinople during the Fourth Crusade was a calculated move to seize Byzantine wealth. including its prized silk workshops, or merely an unfortunate consequence of greed and misdirection. Regardless, the fall of the city certainly dispersed countless master weavers and their precious looms, spreading silk production knowledge further west. Some of these Byzantine silks, once the exclusive property of emperors, ended up as linings for helmets or tunics, offering a secret, luxurious comfort to knights enduring the harshness of medieval combat. Imagine the contrast. A rough, smelly knight probably hasn't bathed in weeks, but underneath his armor, a secret, silken caress against his skin. Pure, unadulterated medieval indulgence. This was more than just practicality. It was the ultimate, understated flex. From being a distant dream, silk had firmly embedded itself within the very structure of European power and prestige. It was no longer just an exotic import. It was becoming an integral part of courtly life, diplomatic gifts, and sacred ceremony. The whispers from the East had become a roar, and Europe, once shivering in wool, was now beginning to drape itself in the shimmering threads of a new silken age. You're standing, or perhaps you're just hovering, in the bustling heart of a Renaissance Italian city. The air vibrates with 1,000 tiny sounds. The clatter of carts on cobblestones, the distant chime of a bell tower, the murmur of 100 languages mingling in the piazza. But what truly captures you, what wraps around your senses like a silken embrace, is the sheer visual opulence. Sunlight, that golden painter, streams down to illuminate bolts of fabric draped from windows, spilling out of merchants' stalls. Here, a deep crimson velvet shimmers, catching the light like liquid jewels. There, a brocade, so intricate it looks painted, tells a story of mythical beasts and blossoming pomegranates. You can almost feel the cool, smooth glide of it against your fingertips, the whisper of its texture. This isn't just fabric. It's status, it's art, it's the very soul of ambition, woven thread by painstaking thread. You remember, not so long ago, how those intrepid Byzantine monks, perhaps with a touch of divine guidance or just a really good disguise, managed to smuggle those precious silkworm eggs from China, eventually breaking that centuries-old monopoly. And then how silk began its stately march across the European continent, adorning the courts of kings and queens, a symbol of unimaginable wealth and power. Well, now you're witnessing the next act in this peculiar drama, where Europe doesn't just receive silk. It begins to master it. And nowhere does this mastery bloom more spectacularly than in the vibrant, fiercely competitive city-states of Italy. The Renaissance wasn't just about art and philosophy. It was a revolution in commerce, and silk was right at its silken heart. Cities like Venice, Florence, Genoa, and Milan weren't content just to trade in the raw materials or finished goods from the East. Oh no, that was far too passive for their entrepreneurial spirits. They saw the dazzling demand, the insatiable hunger of the European elite for that shimmering, luxurious fabric, and they decided, quite emphatically, that they could do it better, faster, and most importantly on their own terms. It was a classic, if you want something done right, do it yourself moment, only with more gold thread and significantly fewer direct instructions. They started small, certainly, learning from the rudimentary techniques that had trickled in. But necessity, or perhaps just sheer greed, is the mother of invention. The Italian artisans, with their innate sense of design and their unparalleled organizational genius, began to innovate at a breathtaking pace. They perfected the rearing of silkworms, meticulously cultivating the mulberry trees, turning humble leaves into shimmering threads with a dedication that bordered on obsession. You'd think tending to thousands of wriggling, hungry worms would be a thankless task. But for the Italian silk masters, it was the first step on a very lucrative ladder. And then came the looms. Forget those ancient, clunky contraptions. The Italians engineered new, more complex looms that could produce fabrics of astonishing complexity and beauty. They developed techniques for velvet, that plush, piled fabric that practically begs to be stroked, and for brocade, where intricate patterns are woven directly into the fabric itself, often with contrasting threads of gold or silver. Imagine the hours, the years, spent perfecting the tension, the shuttle throws, the precise timing of each individual warp and weft. It was, frankly, an insane amount of work. And if you were one of the anonymous laborers hunching over those looms for 14 hours a day, 6 days a week, you probably wouldn't survive this particular entrepreneurial dream without a permanent hunch and a very strong aversion to anything made of silk. Venice, with its vast maritime empire, became a hub for raw silk importation and finished goods distribution, but also a formidable production center, known for its sumptuous velvets. Florence, the cradle of the Renaissance, channeled its artistic genius into silk design, producing brocades and damasks that were masterpieces of textile art, often incorporating floral motifs and mythological scenes. Genoa, another powerful maritime republic, specialized in figured silks, while Milan became famous for its heavy, durable silks, often used for ecclesiastical vestments and ceremonial attire. Each city developed its own unique style, its own trade secrets, fiercely guarded and passed down through generations of guild families. This era also saw the widespread implementation of sumptuary laws. You know, those delightful rules designed to tell people what they could and couldn't wear, usually based on their social standing. In Italy, these laws often dictated who could wear silk, what colors, and even what types of patterns. It was the original fashion police, but with less emphasis on who wore it better and more on you're not important enough to wear that. Can you imagine? You've just saved up for that gorgeous Florentine brocade, only to be told by some civic official that, no, actually, your family hasn't been noble for long enough to sport those particular motifs. It makes you wonder how many fashion rebels just wore their forbidden finery under a giant cloak. The wealth generated by the Italian silk industry was immense. It fueled the lavish lifestyles of merchant princes, funded magnificent cathedrals, and supported the explosion of art that defined the Renaissance. Silk was more than just a luxury. It was currency, a diplomatic gift, a symbol of power and prestige that resonated across Europe. It was also, quite literally, a thread that connected the sophisticated Italian urban centers with the rural countryside where the mulberry trees grew, creating a complex web of agricultural and industrial interdependence. Now, historians still argue whether some of the truly groundbreaking Italian silk innovations were entirely original, or whether they were sophisticated adaptations of techniques quietly learned from Byzantine or even earlier Chinese methods, perhaps brought over by merchants or skilled artisans seeking new opportunities. The truth, as always, is probably a complex tapestry of both, a beautiful fusion of existing knowledge and new, audacious creativity. But regardless of the exact lineage of every stitch, the fact remains that Italy, during the Renaissance, transformed silk from an exotic import into a distinctly European art form, firmly establishing itself as the undisputed master of this peculiar journey from worm to royalty. Section 11. French royalty's silken splendor. Explore the development of France, especially Lyon, into a premier center for high-fashion silk textiles. You step off the sun-drenched Italian cobblestones, leaving behind the bustling workshops of Venice and Florence, and suddenly find yourself in the verdant, rolling landscapes of France. The air feels different here, charged with a subtle, almost imperceptible ambition. The Renaissance, you see, was just a warm-up act. Now France, with its burgeoning monarchy and a penchant for the opulent, begins to cast its own silken spell. You notice the shift immediately, the very fabric of society, quite literally reweaving itself. The whispers aren't about trade routes and bankers anymore. They're about absolute power, grand courts, and fabrics that shimmer like captured starlight. You watch as kings, eager to outshine their European counterparts, turn their gaze towards the shimmering promise of silk. Louis XI, way back in the late 15th century, is one of the first to truly grasp its strategic importance, importing Italian weavers and even mulberry trees to Tours and Lyon. He sees not just beautiful fabric, but an economic engine, a way to keep French gold within French coffers. It's a classic move, really. If you can't beat 'em, import 'em and then outweave 'em. You can almost hear the royal chuckle. But it's really the 17th century, under the Sun King, Louis XIV, and his formidable finance minister, Jean-Baptiste Colbert, that things really hit their stride. Colbert, a man who saw economics as a zero-sum game, believed passionately in mercantilism. He understood that if France was importing vast quantities of silk, it was bleeding wealth. His solution: transform France into a self-sufficient powerhouse, especially in luxury goods. He's the kind of guy who, if he were alive today, would probably be optimizing your entire life with spreadsheets and efficiency reports, making sure you never wasted a single, perfectly good breath. He established royal manufactories, offered incentives, and enacted strict quality controls. If you were a silk weaver in Lyon during this period, you were part of a grand national project, albeit one with very demanding deadlines. You probably wouldn't survive a single shift with those perfectionist standards, honestly. And Lyon, Lyon. You find yourself wandering its narrow, winding streets, feeling the cool spray from the Seine and Rhone rivers that embrace the city. This isn't just any city, it's a destiny-chosen location. The rivers provide the crucial water power for the looms and for dyeing the threads. The city's position, nestled between the silk-producing regions of the south and the eager markets of northern Europe, is ideal. You see the Connaughts, the silk weavers, hunched over their massive wooden looms in the tall, purpose-built workshops with their distinctive high windows, maximizing every precious sliver of light. They work tirelessly, their hands a blur of motion, turning raw silk into masterpieces. It's a rhythmic, almost hypnotic dance of shuttle and thread. The innovation here isn't just about sheer volume. It's about pushing the boundaries of artistry. The Lyonnese weavers become masters of intricate patterns, of rich brocades, of velvets so plush you want to dive into them, of damasks that play tricks with the light. They develop techniques that allow for incredibly complex designs, often commissioned directly by the royal court. Imagine draping your halls in fabric that features gilded fleur-de-lis, mythological scenes, or sprawling floral motifs, so lifelike you almost expect them to wilt. The silk of Lyon becomes synonymous with French elegance, a symbol of unparalleled sophistication. From Versailles, where Louis XIV's court flaunts the latest Lyon creations, to the drawing rooms of European aristocracy, French silk reigns supreme. You can practically hear the rustle of gowns, the swish of elaborate curtains, the whispers of admiration for the sheer extravagance. It's a fashion arms race, and France is winning by a landslide, armed with threads instead of cannons. Historians still argue whether Colbert's top-down approach or the inherent entrepreneurial spirit of the Lyonnais artisans was more responsible for the city's meteoric rise. It's a classic chicken-or-egg scenario, only with much more fabulous plumage. A quirky tidbit you overhear. At one point, some French courtiers were so obsessed with the latest silk fashions that they would buy bolts of fabric without even knowing what they'd make with it, just to have it first. Imagine buying a car just because it's the newest model, and then wondering if it even has wheels. The demand was so ravenous that weavers sometimes worked through the night, powered by little more than ambition and perhaps copious amounts of strong French coffee. So, as you breathe in the scent of ambition and finely spun silk in Lyon, you understand that this isn't just about thread anymore. It's about national identity, about soft power, about proving that your nation can weave a future as intricate and beautiful as the fabrics it produces. You watch as the looms continue their tireless work, a symphony of wood and silk, laying the foundations for an empire built on threads. You feel the salty spray on your face, even here in your cozy bed. The air is thick with the scent of tar, exotic spices, and something undeniably opulent. You hear the creak of enormous timbers, the rhythmic chants of sailors hauling ropes, and the chaotic din of 1,000 languages mingling on bustling docks. Towering masts pierce the sky, their sails furled, waiting for the wind to carry them back to lands you can only dream of. Crates are piled high, spilling forth treasures, pepper, indigo, tea, and perhaps most coveted of all, shimmering bales of silk. This isn't just a port. It's the beating heart of a burgeoning global empire, driven by an insatiable European hunger for the extraordinary. And at the very center of this grand, maritime ballet stands a new, formidable player, the East India Company. Remember those Italian masters and French couturiers vying for supremacy in silk? Well, they're about to get a whole lot more raw material thanks to this behemoth. Initially, the company's eyes were fixed on the fragrant riches of the spice trade, the kind of aromatic gold that could make a bland European meal sing. But their gaze, like a predator spotting even richer prey, soon shifted. They saw the dazzling potential in Indian textiles, in cotton, and most lucratively in the very threads of silk itself. India, with its ancient weaving traditions and perfect climate for mulberry cultivation, was a treasure trove waiting to be, shall we say, optimized. The transformation of local economies under the company's burgeoning influence was swift, and for many, utterly brutal. Imagine a quiet village, generations of farmers tending their rice paddies or cotton fields. Then, suddenly, a decree arrives, carried by stern-faced agents of the company. You will now grow mulberry, lots of it, and you will raise silkworms, lots of them. Your ancestral lands, once supporting a diverse array of crops for your family's sustenance, are now monoculture zones, dedicated to feeding hungry silkworms for distant European backs. The company didn't just want to trade. It wanted to control every single stage of production. They established vast filatures. These weren't charming little workshops, mind you, but large, often oppressive, silk-reeling factories, where countless hands toiled under strict supervision. You'd be paid, of course, but often just enough to survive, to keep you coming back for another day of back-breaking, eye-straining labor. It was a grand tapestry of luxury woven from thread and, well, let's just say, tears. Here's a little reality check for you. If you were one of those local farmers or weavers trying to resist the company's dictates, you probably wouldn't survive this. Your only options were to comply or face destitution, perhaps even violence. The grand European demand for silk, for elegant gowns and opulent furnishings, was built upon a foundation of relentless, often inhumane, pressure on the ground. The East India Company's business model was elegantly simple, if morally questionable. Buy low, sell high, and if anyone complains, send in the Fusiliers. Their vast network, stretching from the lush, verdant fields of Bengal all the way to the smoky, bustling docks of London, wasn't just a trade route. It was a global circulatory system for colonial commerce. They wielded not just economic power, but military might, effectively becoming a state within a state. They didn't just influence the market. They dominated it, systematically eliminating local competition, monopolizing trade, and dictating prices. This wasn't some quaint bazaar where you haggled over a good deal. This was a free market, as interpreted by a company with its own standing army. The sheer scale of their operations was unprecedented. By the mid-18th century, the East India Company, initially chartered as a trading venture, had transformed into a de facto ruler, governing vast territories in India with its own formidable army, intricate bureaucracy, and comprehensive legal system. It was a political entity unlike any other on Earth. Their attempts to improve Indian sericulture often read like a comedy of errors, if it weren't for the serious consequences for local producers. European experts were dispatched, armed with charts and theories from Italy, convinced they could somehow make Indian silkworms more European. They insisted on specific reeling techniques that sometimes ruined the unique qualities of fine Indian silk, or pushed for crossbreeding experiments that produced, shall we say, unexpected results. It was as if they told a master chef to abandon his secret family recipe for a bland, standardized meal, all for the sake of efficiency and uniformity for European machines. One can almost hear the silkworms sighing. Just when I thought I was done spinning, these guys show up wanting more thread. Do they not understand I'm an artist, not a factory? Meanwhile, back in Europe, the fashionistas would chirp, "Darling, it simply must be Indian silk. I mean, how else will people know I'm wealthy enough to exploit an entire subcontinent?" The company's policies profoundly globalized the silk market, irrevocably moving its center of gravity. No longer was silk production solely the domain of ancient empires or independent artisan guilds. Now, it was a cog in a vast, interconnected, and often cruelly efficient global machine. The power dynamics shifted dramatically, from the hands of the skilled artisan to the iron grip of the corporate empire. While undeniably exploitative, historians still argue whether the East India Company's actions inadvertently laid some foundational infrastructure or administrative structures that later facilitated independent India's development, or if its legacy is purely one of detrimental colonial extraction. One thing is certain: the East India Company didn't just trade silk. It transformed the very nature of its journey, from a delicate thread spun by a tiny worm to a strategic commodity in a global power struggle. Its legacy, while massive and complex, was just one chapter in silk's ever-evolving journey. What happens when machines truly take over the spinning, the weaving, the dyeing? You step now into a different kind of darkness, not the hushed secrecy of ancient Chinese palaces or the cloistered silence of Byzantine monasteries, but the thrumming, cacophonous gloom of an industrial mill. The air is thick with the scent of oil and newly spun thread, a metallic tang that clings to your tongue. Here, The soft whisper of silkworms munching on mulberry leaves is drowned out by the relentless clatter and hiss of iron and steam. You feel the tremor of the factory floor beneath your feet, a constant, low vibration that seems to resonate in your very bones. This isn't the romanticized vision of silk, is it? No, this is the hard-nosed reality of progress, where the delicate, almost magical transformation of a worm's filament meets the unyielding force of human ingenuity, often at great human cost. Imagine, for a moment, the sheer physical toll of silk production before these innovations. We've seen the empresses and the monks, the daring smugglers and the meticulous Italian artisans, but beneath the shimmering surface of their finished products lay countless hours of grueling, repetitive labor. Reeling silk from cocoons, twisting the gossamer strands into durable thread, meticulously setting up hundreds, thousands of warp and weft threads on a handloom to create intricate patterns. It was slow, painstaking work, prone to error, and desperately inefficient when demand began to skyrocket. The expanding European markets, fueled by the insatiable desire for luxury and status, were practically screaming for more silk, faster, cheaper. And the old ways, for all their artisanal beauty, simply couldn't keep up. The challenges were manifold. Consistency was a nightmare. A single break in the delicate filament could halt production. The skilled labor required meant high wages, pushing up the price of the final product. And those glorious, complex patterns that had defined European silk's prestige. They were created by an army of drawboys, young apprentices perched precariously above the loom, manually lifting and lowering individual warp threads according to a master weaver's instructions. It was a ballet of human endurance, one slip of attention leading to hours of unraveling. If you were a drawboy, you probably wouldn't survive this kind of work for long without permanent physical damage, if not outright collapse from exhaustion or a fall. It was an industrial revolution waiting to happen, a breaking point where the human hand, for all its dexterity, simply couldn't compete with the potential of the machine. Enter the brilliant, if somewhat troubled, mind of Joseph Marie Jacquard. You can almost see him, pacing his workshop in Lyon, the heart of French silk weaving, wrestling with the inefficiencies he saw everywhere. His invention wasn't entirely from scratch. He built upon earlier, less successful attempts by Basil Bouchon, Jean-Baptiste Falcon, and Jacques Vaucanson. These precursors had experimented with perforated paper or cards to control looms, but Jacquard's genius lay in refining and combining these ideas into a truly practical, scalable machine. In 1801, he unveiled what would become known as the Jacquard loom, and it changed everything. Think of it. A loom controlled not by human hands, but by a continuous chain of punched cards. Each hole in a card corresponded to a specific hook on the loom. If there was a hole, the hook would pass through, allowing a warp thread to be lifted. If there was no hole, the hook would be blocked, and the thread would remain down. With each pass of the shuttle, a new card in the chain would be read, dictating the next set of threads to be lifted. Suddenly, complex patterns that previously required a small army of drawboys and days of intricate setup could be woven with astounding speed and precision by a single operator. The machine was, in essence, programmed. You're looking at an ancestor of the modern computer, right there in the clatter and steam of a textile mill. The very concept of binary code, on or off, hole or no hole, was being applied to fabric. The impact was immediate and profound, not always positively received. Imagine being a skilled drawboy, seeing your livelihood, your years of arduous training, suddenly threatened by a contraption of wood and iron. You might, understandably, feel the urge to introduce that machine to the business end of a sledgehammer. The Luddites, those early champions of quality control by blunt force trauma, certainly did. They found their cause amplified in the weaving sheds, convinced these infernal devices were not just weaving fabric, but unpicking the very fabric of society itself. Yet, the economic imperative was too strong. The jacquard loom dramatically reduced the cost of producing complex patterned silks, making them more accessible to a burgeoning middle class, not just the aristocracy. This wasn't just about faster weaving. It was about democratizing luxury, transforming an exclusive royal privilege into something that, while still expensive, was no longer solely the domain of kings and queens. Beyond the jacquard loom, other less celebrated but equally crucial innovations were taking hold. Silk reeling, still largely done by hand, saw improvements in reeling machines that produced more consistent, stronger filaments. New dyeing techniques, leveraging advances in chemistry, allowed for a wider, more vibrant palette of colors that were also more fast and durable. The entire ecosystem of silk production, from the initial raw material to the finished bolt of fabric, was undergoing a quiet revolution, piece by painstaking piece. Historians still argue whether the jacquard loom was the definitive catalyst for mechanization in other industries, or merely a highly visible symptom of a broader industrial shift. Was it the spark, or just another flame in the raging fire of progress? What this meant for you, the consumer, was a dazzling array of choices. You could now find brocades with intricate floral motifs, damasks shimmering with geometric precision, and satins that flowed like liquid light, all produced with a consistency and at a scale previously unimaginable. The industrial age didn't just innovate, it globalized and commercialized silk in ways the ancient Silk Road could only have dreamed of. It was a double-edged sword. The artistry of the individual weaver might have diminished in some respects, replaced by the relentless efficiency of the machine. But the beauty of silk, now more widely available, continued its peculiar journey, adapting and transforming with the times. The clatter of the loom, the rhythmic punch of the cards, these were the new heartbeat of silk, propelling it from ancient secret to modern marvel, setting the stage for even grander transformations to come. The era of pure handcrafted exclusivity was fading, replaced by the dawn of mass production. But the allure, that inherent pull of silk's unique shimmer and softness, remained as potent as ever. You find yourself in a different kind of quiet, a hushed reverence that settles deep in the rice paper rooms of an old Japanese minka. The morning light, diffused and softened by shoji screens, casts gentle patterns across the tatami mats, illuminating rows of trays. On these trays, not exotic fruits or offerings, but the diligent, almost imperceptible munching of thousands upon thousands of silkworms. The air here isn't thick with the incense of a temple, but with the subtle, earthy perfume of fresh mulberry leaves, constantly replenished, constantly devoured. This is Japan's elegant silk heritage, a story woven thread by meticulous thread, often in deliberate, almost artistic isolation from the world you've previously explored. You watch as a wizened hand, delicate and practiced, gently lifts a leaf, revealing a cluster of these tiny, voracious creatures. Their movements are rhythmic, a soft, constant rustle that is the very sound of production, a living loom in miniature. Unlike the vast, state-controlled imperial factories of China, or the burgeoning mercantile enterprises of Italy and France, Japanese sericulture, for centuries, was often a deeply familial affair. Whole households, particularly the women, dedicated themselves to the meticulous care of these worms, considering them almost like honored guests, or, perhaps, demanding, perpetually hungry children. You can almost feel the concentrated patience required, the almost spiritual connection to the natural cycles of growth and transformation. Here, the focus wasn't always just on sheer volume, but on the intrinsic quality, the subtle sheen, the very soul of the silk. Different regions nurtured different silkworm breeds, each yielding unique textures and lusters, from the crisp, translucent beauty of habutai to the more rustic, slubbed character of pongee. It wasn't merely a commodity. It was an expression, a connection to the very essence of the land and its people. You see why some traditions held specific rituals for the silkworms, almost begging their indulgence, praying for bountiful cocoons. And you realize, as you observe the fragile, almost impossibly delicate thread being pulled from a simmering cocoon, that one wrong move, one moment of carelessness, one sudden temperature drop, and your entire year's livelihood, or perhaps even your village's reputation, given how much was staked on flawless silk, could vanish. Honestly, you probably wouldn't survive a single season of this meticulous, high-stakes husbandry. While China had guarded its secret for millennia, Japan received the knowledge much later, likely through Korea, and then developed its own distinct practices. For centuries, the island nation maintained a relatively closed-door policy, a period of self-imposed isolation that, paradoxically, allowed its sericulture and textile arts to flourish in unique ways. You see it in the highly specialized tools, the precise techniques for unraveling cocoons, and the artistic dedication to dyeing and weaving, producing kimonos and exquisite fabrics that were themselves works of art. This wasn't merely about clothing. It was about status, ceremony, and a profound aesthetic appreciation that permeates every aspect of life, down to the very threads you're now admiring. Then came the Meiji Restoration in the mid-19th century, a seismic shift that propelled Japan onto the global stage, and silk found itself in an entirely new role. Suddenly, what had been largely a domestic craft, a quiet tradition, became a crucial engine for a nation desperate to modernize and compete. Japan began to industrialize its silk production with astonishing speed and efficiency. You witness a profound transformation. The small, family-run operations slowly giving way to larger filatures, factories humming with new machinery, all aimed at producing high-quality raw silk for export. This was Japan's golden ticket, a primary source of foreign currency needed to buy Western technology and knowledge. This rapid industrialization was a mainstream historical fact that reshaped the global textile landscape. By the late 19th and early 20th centuries, Japan had become the world's leading exporter of raw silk, its threads flowing across the Pacific to fuel the booming textile mills in America and Europe. You can almost see the vast ships laden with bales of shimmering silk, heading to Lyon, to New York, to London. The Japanese raw silk was prized for its uniform quality and strength, essential for the new industrial looms that demanded consistent threads. Remember the jacquard loom we talked about? Japanese silk fed those hungry machines, allowing for ever more complex and exquisite patterns to be woven. Here's a quirky tidbit. The Japanese even developed specific methods for detecting diseases in silkworms, like flashery and pabrine, long before European sericulturists, often relying on keen observation and a deep understanding of the worm's subtle behaviors. They didn't have Pasteur's microscopes initially, but they had generations of accumulated wisdom, and an almost intuitive sense for the health of their tiny charges. This empirical knowledge, honed over centuries, was a testament to their dedication. Historians still argue whether Japan's long period of isolation, the Sakoku era, inadvertently preserved its unique sericulture methods, allowing them to develop distinct from the more direct lineage of Chinese influences, or if early Chinese techniques were simply adapted so thoroughly to the Japanese climate, culture, and artistic sensibilities that they became uniquely Japanese. It's a fascinating question, isn't it? Did the lack of external pressure allow for a purer, more organic evolution of the craft? Or did necessity, once the doors opened, simply prove to be the mother of invention on an unprecedented scale? Regardless, Japan's silk was more than just a commodity. It was an ambassador. It carried with it a whisper of Japanese aesthetics, a subtle understanding of beauty, even when simply a raw, undyed thread. It was a testament to meticulousness, to discipline, and to an unyielding pursuit of perfection that, even today, you can discern in the quiet hum of a traditional Japanese weaving workshop, or the almost breathless beauty of a perfectly draped kimono. The journey of silk, from the humble worm to royal garments, found one of its most elegant and globally impactful expressions here. On these islands, threads shimmering with a quiet, enduring strength. Section 15. Synthetics challenge silk's reign. Analyze the emergence of man-made fibers and their disruptive impact on the natural silk industry. You feel the crisp, almost too smooth slide of something new against your fingertips. It's not the familiar whisper of silk. No, not the irregular, organic drape you've come to associate with luxury and age-old tradition. This, my friend, is different. It's too perfect, too uniform, born not of a humble worm's tireless labor, but of a chemist's beaker and a factory's hum. It's the late 19th, early 20th century, and a quiet revolution is stirring in the textile world, one that will eventually ripple through the very foundations of the silk empire you've just explored. Imagine for a moment the consternation in Lyon, in Milan, in Kyoto as whispers turn into shouts. They've done it! They've made artificial silk! And you might think, oh, a little competition, how quaint. But this isn't quaint. This is existential. This is the kind of challenge that, if you were a tiny silkworm, you probably wouldn't survive. The first true contender wasn't even called rayon originally. It was chardonnette silk, or viscose, a marvel of early chemical engineering invented by French chemist Hilaire de Chardonnette in the late 1880s. This marked the official birth of man-made fibers. For the first time, you could produce a continuous filament that mimicked silk's famous luster and drape, not from a living creature, but from regenerated cellulose, often derived from something as unassuming as wood pulp. Think about that for a second. Trees, chemically treated and extruded into threads, ready to compete with the queen of fabrics. It sounds like something out of a pulp fiction novel, doesn't it? Chardonnette himself was a student of Louis Pasteur and was initially trying to find a way to produce artificial silk for his silkworm-ravaged region of France. The irony is, he ended up creating something that would, in many ways, challenge the very industry he sought to protect. Initially, these artificial silks were met with a curious mix of awe and skepticism. They were undeniably cheaper, could be produced in vast, seemingly endless quantities, and offered a new kind of uniformity that natural silk, with its inherent variations, simply couldn't match. But they also had their distinct drawbacks. Early rayon, for instance, could be quite brittle when wet, leading to some rather embarrassing wardrobe malfunctions. Imagine stepping out in a sudden downpour only to have your elegant silk, gowns suddenly developed the structural integrity of wet tissue paper. Not ideal for a grand ball or even a brisk walk to the shops, unless you were aiming for a distinctly deconstructed look. They also often lacked the natural breathability and soft hand of true silk, feeling somewhat clammy or stiff in comparison. Then came nylon. Oh, nylon. If rayon was silk's curious cousin, nylon was its aggressive, technologically advanced sibling. Developed by Wallace Carothers and his team at DuPont in the 1930s, nylon wasn't just regenerated cellulose. It was a completely synthetic polymer, born entirely from petroleum-based chemicals. It was stronger, more resilient, and revolutionary in its elasticity, durability, and sheer resistance to wrinkles and moths. Suddenly, you weren't just mimicking silk. You were creating something fundamentally new with properties silk couldn't easily match, especially in applications like hosiery, parachutes, fishing lines, and later, durable clothing. Remember when nylon stockings first hit the market in 1939 and 1940? It was a phenomenon, a veritable stampede, a craze. Women queued for hours, sometimes days, literally fighting to get their hands on these miraculous, sheer, and remarkably durable creations. It felt like magic, a genuine glimpse into a futuristic world where everyday luxury was within reach. Did you know that when nylon was first introduced to the public at the 1939 New York World's Fair, it was hyped as strong as steel, fine as a spider web? Some early promotional stunts even involved using nylon ropes to pull cars, just to demonstrate its incredible, almost unbelievable strength. It was almost like a sci-fi material stepping out of a comic book and into your wardrobe. The impact on the natural silk industry was profound, and in many ways devastating. For centuries, across Asia and eventually Europe, silk had enjoyed an almost unchallenged supremacy in luxury textiles. Its price was high, its production labor-intensive, and its availability limited by the life cycle of a tiny insect. Now, suddenly, you had alternatives that were significantly cheaper, mass-producible, and could be engineered for specific properties, like being ladder-proof in hosiery, a major selling point. Silk producers, particularly those focused on everyday applications rather than high-fashion couture, saw their markets erode at an alarming rate. The demand for raw silk plummeted, and many smaller sericulture operations, especially in places like Japan, which had become a dominant player, and Italy, struggled intensely to compete. It was a classic tale of disruption. The old guard, steeped in tradition and dependent on biological processes, facing off against the relentless march of chemical innovation and industrial efficiency. Despite the onslaught, natural silk didn't simply vanish. Oh no, it adapted like a wise old master who, having lost a few skirmishes, retreats to consolidate their strengths. While it lost its monopoly on everyday hosiery and utilitarian garments to the likes of nylon and rayon, it retained its unique position as a quintessential luxury fiber. The qualities that synthetics couldn't perfectly replicate silk's unparalleled drape: its natural, nuanced sheen, its breathability, its hypoallergenic properties, its ability to regulate temperature, and that indescribable, almost sensual feeling against the skin kept it in demand for high-end fashion, exquisite scarves, luxury lingerie, and sophisticated home furnishings. It became less about quantity and more about quality, about celebrating its inherent, natural beauty and supreme comfort. Historians still argue whether the emergence of synthetics was the ultimate nail in the coffin for the widespread common use of natural silk, or if silk was already transitioning into a more specialized luxury market due to increasing labor costs and the complexities of sericulture. Was it an external, overwhelming shock, or merely an acceleration of an existing, slower trend? Some scholars point to the economic pressures of the interwar period and the increasing cost of hand labor as primary drivers, with synthetics merely providing an accessible, affordable alternative for the masses who couldn't afford true silk anyway. Others argue that the sheer versatility, durability, and cost-effectiveness of man-made fibers were the undeniable game changers, forcing silk to retreat almost entirely into its exclusive, high-end niche. The debate reflects the complex interplay of technology, economics, and consumer demand that reshapes industries. The natural silk industry, though challenged to its core, didn't give up entirely. It continued to innovate in its own ways, focusing on sustainable practices, ethical sourcing, and promoting silk's inherent, unmatched qualities. It had to reinvent itself, not as the everyday fiber, but as the ultimate fiber, a testament to nature's artistry and the enduring appeal of genuine luxury. You might find yourself comparing the two today: the synthetic, often a marvel of engineering and scientific ingenuity, and the natural, a marvel of biology and ancient tradition, each serving its purpose, yet one still whispering tales of empresses and ancient roads, of a secret jealously guarded for millennia. You can almost hear the sigh of relief from the silkworms, perhaps, as their burden of dressing the entire world was partially lifted, allowing them to focus on the truly exquisite, the truly unparalleled. The world of textiles became a vibrant, competitive arena, no longer dominated by a single, delicate thread, but enriched by a spectrum of fibers, each with its own story, its own peculiar journey from concept to cloth. But still, when you touch a true silk garment, there's an ancient resonance, a connection to those thousands of years of whispers and secrets that no synthetic, however clever, however advanced, can quite replicate. Section 16. Silk's modern niche resurgence. You stand in a boutique, not one filled with dusty relics or ancient scrolls, but a gleaming space of minimalist design, soft lighting, and an almost reverent hush. Your fingers brush against a fabric, cool and smooth, with a subtle shimmer that seems to absorb and reflect light simultaneously. It's not the stiff, scratchy polyester of a bygone era, nor the crisp cotton of everyday wear. This, my dear sleeper, is silk. And just when you thought its story was winding down, overshadowed by the chemical marvels of the 20th century, it stages a comeback so elegant, so quiet, you might have missed it. If you were, say, caught in a time loop watching endless reruns of synthetic fabric commercials, you probably wouldn't survive this resurgence without a serious case of cognitive dissonance. Remember that era we just discussed, the one where nylon and rayon muscled their way onto the scene, promising durability, affordability, and a freedom from the delicate whims of natural fibers. Silk, for a moment, seemed destined for the historical archives, a relic of opulence for a world rushing headlong into mass production. But here's the twist. Quality, true luxury, and a deep appreciation for nature's artistry have a way of reasserting themselves. The pendulum, it seems, always swings back. Today, natural silk isn't merely surviving. It's thriving in carefully cultivated niches, reclaiming its crown in realms where synthetics simply cannot compete. Take the luxury market, for instance. Walk into any high-end fashion house, peruse the collections of designers who dictate global trends, and you'll find silk not just present, but celebrated. From flowing evening gowns that whisper across the skin to sharply tailored suits with silk linings that feel like a secret indulgence, its unparalleled drape, its ethereal sheen, its gentle caress against the skin. These are qualities that remain inimitable. No matter how advanced our laboratories become, that distinct soft rustle, that unique way silk catches the light as you move, those are properties still firmly rooted in the humble silkworm's artistry. It's why a genuine silk scarf remains an heirloom piece, passed down through generations, while its polyester imitation, well, becomes a glorified dusting rag after a few washes. It's less about a price tag and more about an experience, a subtle affirmation of quality in a world saturated with the disposable. But beyond the runways and the exclusive boutiques, silk has found a powerful new champion, the sustainable fashion movement. In an age grappling with the environmental impact of fast fashion, where mountains of synthetic waste clog landfills and microplastics pollute our oceans, silk emerges as an unlikely hero. It's a natural protein fiber, completely biodegradable. When your silk blouse eventually reaches the end of its luxurious life, it will return to the earth, quietly decomposing, leaving no lasting trace. Contrast that with, say, a polyester blend, which might well outlive your great-grandchildren, stubbornly persisting in the environment. Many brands are now actively seeking out piece silk or ahimsa silk, where the silkworms are allowed to emerge from their cocoons naturally, unharmed before the silk is harvested. This ethical approach, though often more labor-intensive and thus pricier, appeals deeply to a consumer base increasingly conscious of their ecological and ethical footprint. It's a far cry from the ruthless efficiency of the industrial age, proving that sometimes slower and kinder truly is better. And no, you can't just knit a sweater out of your old plastic bottles and expect it to feel the same. Trust me, I've seen the attempts. It's less eco-chic and more recycled garbage bag lux. Now brace yourself for the truly unexpected. Silk's foray into specialized applications that extend far beyond fashion. We're talking about areas where its unique protein structure offers properties that synthetic materials struggle to replicate. In the biomedical field, for instance, silk fibrin, the protein derived from silk, is a superstar. You see it in sutures that are incredibly strong yet naturally dissolve in the body, eliminating the need for removal. It's being explored for drug delivery systems, providing a natural, biocompatible scaffold to deliver medication precisely where it's needed. Even more astonishingly, researchers are engineering silk into scaffolds for tissue regeneration, guiding the growth of new bone, cartilage, or even nerve tissue. Imagine a world where a natural fiber spun by a tiny insect helps regrow a damaged organ. It's like something out of a sci-fi novel, only it's happening in labs right now. Historians still argue whether the initial underestimation of silk's biochemical potential was a grand oversight, or merely a logical consequence of technological limitations at the time. Beyond medicine, silk's unique properties are being harnessed in advanced materials. Its remarkable strength-to-weight ratio, its flexibility, and its biocompatibility make it valuable for lightweight composites in aerospace or even in developing highly sensitive sensors. You might find silk being considered for advanced protective gear, or for specialized filters, or even as a component in cutting-edge electronics. And then there are the less dramatic, but equally impactful daily applications that have seen a resurgence. Silk pillowcases, for instance, are lauded for their benefits for hair and skin, reducing friction and moisture absorption that can lead to frizz and fine lines. Silk scrunchies, silk sleep masks, even silk-infused cosmetics, The market has rediscovered that sometimes the most ancient materials offer the most cutting-edge benefits. It turns out that Empress Leizu, way back when, might have been onto something more than just a fancy new dress material. She unwittingly stumbled upon a biomaterial marvel, whose full potential we're only just beginning to truly appreciate. It's almost as if the silkworm, after millennia of perfecting its craft, is finally getting its due recognition beyond just pretty fabrics. And if you think about it, a worm producing material for human tissue regeneration is a pretty neat trick for something that primarily eats leaves and then commits to a single, very silky life project. Section 17. Contemporary global silk trade. Map the current landscape of major silk-producing and consuming nations worldwide. You drift now across vast continents, the whisper of silken threads carried on the global winds, a stark contrast to the guarded secrets of ancient China or the clandestine journeys of Byzantine monks. Imagine standing today on the bustling docks of a colossal port, containers stacked higher than your wildest dreams, some filled with shimmering bales of raw silk, others with exquisite finished garments, destined for every corner of the earth. The air hums with the low thrum of machinery, the distant clang of cranes, a symphony of modern commerce that would make Empress Leizu's jaw drop. You might even spot a drone whizzing overhead, overseeing the logistics, a far cry from the camel caravans that once painstakingly carried these precious fibers across dusty deserts. Frankly, if you had to personally track every single strand of silk from a mulberry leaf to a designer gown, you'd probably need about 3 more lifetimes, and a much better pair of walking shoes. The silkworm, that industrious little muncher, is still very much at the heart of this colossal enterprise. While the methods have evolved, the fundamental process remains rooted in nature. Today, however, the landscape of production is dominated by a familiar name: China. Yes, despite all the attempts to steal its secrets, despite the rise of Italian masters and French couturiers, China has reasserted its historical supremacy, producing the vast majority of the world's raw silk. You see it everywhere, from the meticulously managed mulberry farms in provinces like Zhejiang and Jiangsu, stretching out like green carpets, to the humming processing plants where cocoons are reeled and spun with astonishing efficiency. It's a testament to centuries of ingrained knowledge, passed down through generations, now amplified by modern agricultural and industrial techniques. This isn't just about volume. It's about a deeply integrated ecosystem, where tradition meets technology, churning out tons of the lustrous fiber. Following closely behind China, you'll find India, another major player in the global silk game. India, with its diverse climate and rich textile heritage, produces various types of silk, not just the familiar mulberry silk. Think of the golden muga silk from Assam, spun by a different kind of worm, feeding on unique leaves, or the rugged tussar silk, wild and earthy. This variety, coupled with a massive domestic market for traditional saris and garments, ensures India's prominent position. It's a fascinating duality, where modern factories operate alongside countless small-scale, family-run sericulture units, each contributing to the national output. You can almost feel the difference in the air, the unique textures woven into the very fabric of Indian culture. Other significant producers dot the global map, each with its own niche and story. Uzbekistan, for instance, once a crucial stop along the ancient Silk Road, has seen a resurgence in its silk industry, leveraging its historical ties to the trade. You can imagine the echoes of ancient merchants bartering for silk, now replaced by international commodity traders. Brazil, surprisingly to some, has also emerged as a noteworthy producer, its vast agricultural lands offering fertile ground for mulberry cultivation. Even Vietnam and Thailand, with their vibrant craft traditions, contribute to the global supply, often focusing on artisanal, hand-woven silks that fetch premium prices in luxury markets. It's like a grand global quilt, each patch representing a different thread of the silk story. On the consumption side, the narrative shifts. While China and India consume a substantial portion of their own production, primarily for their domestic markets and traditional attire, the demand for silk stretches far beyond. Europe, particularly Italy and France, remains a major consumer, upholding their legacy as centers of high fashion and luxury textiles. You see it in the exquisite silk scarves adorning Parisian women, the sleek ties worn in Milanese boardrooms, and the flowing gowns gracing red carpets worldwide. The United States, too, imports vast quantities of silk, not just for high-end fashion, but also for home furnishings and increasingly for specialized industrial applications. Remember how we talked about silk's incredible strength and lightness. Those properties make it valuable in unexpected places, from medical sutures to parachute cords. Japan, despite its shrinking sericulture industry due to high labor costs and competition, remains a significant consumer of high-quality silk, especially for traditional kimonos and specialized textiles. They value its cultural significance and inherent beauty, even if the worms are now munching mulberry leaves on foreign soil. And then there are the emerging markets, particularly in the Middle East and parts of Asia, where growing affluence fuels a desire for luxury goods. And silk, with its timeless appeal, fits perfectly into that expanding consumer landscape. It's a beautiful dance between producers and consumers, a continuous flow of the lustrous fiber across oceans and continents. However, the contemporary silk trade isn't without its challenges. The rise of synthetic fibers, as we briefly touched upon, continues to exert pressure, offering cheaper, more easily mass-produced alternatives. Sustainability is another growing concern. Consumers are increasingly asking about the environmental footprint and ethical sourcing of their silk. Is the water usage efficient? Are the workers paid fairly? These are the questions that now ripple through boardrooms and design studios, forcing the industry to adapt and innovate. Historians still argue whether the current concentration of silk production in a few major countries is solely due to natural advantages like climate and labor, or if it's more about the lasting legacy of historical trade routes and established infrastructure, making it incredibly difficult for new players to break into the market at scale. It's a chicken and egg situation, really. Did the silk go there because it was good, or is it good because the silk went there? Either way, you witness a fascinating testament to the enduring allure of silk, a fiber that has navigated millennia of change, from a closely guarded imperial secret to a global commodity, still cherished for its unique feel and undeniable luxury. It's a world of threads, intricately woven into the very fabric of our modern lives. You feel the whisper-soft brush of it against your skin, a sensation that transcends mere fabric. You're not just wearing cloth. You're enveloped in history, in power, in a profound silence that speaks volumes. This isn't just the product of a diligent little worm and a hungry mulberry leaf. No. This is the very essence of cultural identity, woven thread by painstakingly extracted thread. You stand, perhaps, in the hushed opulence of a Tang dynasty court, or within the vibrant, sun-drenched bazaar of Samarkand, or even in the dimly lit scriptorium of a Byzantine monastery, where the scent of old parchment mixes with the faint, sweet aroma of newly woven silk. You are a living canvas, bearing the weight of civilizations. This particular moment in history, it's less about who wore the crown and more about what the crown wore, draped in symbolism so potent it could make or break empires. And honestly, if you'd had to spend your entire life meticulously spinning a single, continuous strand of protein from your own body, only for it to be turned into a pair of fancy pajamas for some potentate, you probably wouldn't survive this level of existential dread. Just a thought. From the moment Empress Leizu's accidental discovery first unveiled its shimmering potential, silk in China became more than just a textile. It became a language. It communicated status with every rustle, wealth with every drape, and even a spiritual connection to the cosmos. Imagine, if you will, the intricate brocades adorning the imperial throne, each motif not merely decorative but a coded message of prosperity, longevity, or divine right. Dragons, phoenixes, clouds, and mythical beasts weren't just pretty pictures. They were prayers, blessings, and declarations of unparalleled authority. A high-ranking official's rank was literally sewn into his robes. The specific shades of yellow, red, or violet, and the intricacy of the patterns, broadcasting his standing from a mile away. It was a sartorial shorthand, a silent hierarchy you could read across a crowded banquet hall. And forget about cash. Silk was often used as a form of currency, a precious commodity more stable and certainly more beautiful than coins. Think about it. A few bolts of fine damask could buy you a small villa or an army's worth of provisions. Forget Bitcoin. Silk was the original blockchain, far more aesthetically pleasing. As the Silk Road unfurled, carrying these exquisite threads westward, the symbolism of silk migrated too, adapting to new soils and new beliefs. In Persia, you see its deep, rich colors mirroring the vibrancy of their poetic traditions, often depicting hunting scenes or garden paradises, a tangible piece of heaven on earth. The Sasanian Empire, for instance, wove powerful, symmetrical designs featuring animals and mythical creatures, embodying cosmic order and the king's dominion. These weren't just pretty fabrics for your palace. They were reflections of the universe, carefully tailored. In India, silk found its way into the spiritual heart of the subcontinent, becoming integral to religious rituals and ceremonies. You'd find vibrant silk saris worn during weddings, imbued with blessings and good fortune, or used to adorn deities in temples, symbolizing purity and auspiciousness. The very act of wearing silk could elevate a mundane moment into something sacred. When those intrepid Byzantine monks, remember them, with their hollowed-out staffs, finally brought the silkworm's secrets to Constantinople, silk immediately transformed into a symbol of imperial and ecclesiastical power. The Byzantine emperors, keen to assert their legitimacy as successors to Rome, draped themselves in silk of unparalleled richness, often dyed with the exorbitantly expensive Tyrian purple, a color reserved exclusively for royalty. You'd see it in the flowing robes of the emperor, in the shimmering curtains of the imperial palace, and most strikingly, in the vestments of the highest church officials. Silk became part of the very fabric of divine authority, literally clothing the sacred. Historians still argue whether the elaborate silk iconography found in Byzantine churches, depicting saints and biblical scenes, was merely an artistic expression, or a deliberate theological statement about the emperor's divine mandate. It makes you wonder how many ecclesiastical arguments were secretly debates about thread count. Across the sprawling Islamic caliphates, silk was embraced with characteristic artistry, while strict interpretations of religious law sometimes discouraged figurative representations. Islamic silk weavers mastered geometric patterns, intricate arabesques, and elegant calligraphy, often incorporating verses from the Quran. You'd find these exquisite textiles adorning mosques, decorating palatial interiors, and gracing the finest robes worn by scholars and sultans. Silk here wasn't just a display of wealth. It was a testament to the divine order and the beauty of creation. Each knot and weave a tiny prayer. Imagine the sheer dedication required to weave a complex Kufic script across a shimmering panel. It's enough to give your fingers cramps just thinking about it. In medieval Europe, silk was the ultimate status symbol, a tangible link to the exotic East. You'd find it in the sumptuous gowns of queens, the ceremonial banners of knights, and especially in the elaborate vestments of the Catholic Church. A bishop's cope or a cardinal's chasuble, heavy with gold and silk embroidery, wasn't just clothing. It was a visual sermon, a declaration of heavenly connection. The sheer cost meant only the wealthiest or most powerful could afford it, making silk a silent arbiter of social standing. Even today, if you see an old portrait of a European noble from the Renaissance, the sheer volume and luxurious drape of their silk clothing tells you more about their bank balance than any ledger ever could. It's like wearing your credit score. Mythology, too, is interwoven with silk. In China, the goddess Leizu, the silkworm mother, is revered, her discovery a gift from the heavens. You hear tales of celestial weavers spinning threads of starlight, and the silkworm itself is sometimes seen as a humble yet miraculous creature, embodying diligence and transformation. In Japan, silk has a deep connection to aesthetic principles, to the beauty of simplicity and the harmony of nature. Their kimonos, often made of silk, are not merely garments but works of art, imbued with cultural narratives and family histories passed down through generations. These are more than just clothes, they're wearable legacies. So, as you drift deeper into this silken narrative, remember that you're not just tracing the path of a thread, but the very DNA of human civilization, spun from the unassuming efforts of a tiny, yet profoundly impactful creature. You feel a slight hum in the air, a whisper of innovation hinting at silk's next grand act. For centuries, you've watched this shimmering fiber adorn royalty, but now, it's stepping out of the wardrobe and into the lab, becoming something far more intricate. If you thought silk's journey was confined to fashion runways, prepare to have your mind gently unspooled. The future of silk isn't just about what you wear. It's about what heals you, replaces worn-out parts, and, quite literally, builds a better you. You probably won't survive this if you're an old-fashioned tailor expecting only fashion advice. Your body, surprisingly, doesn't throw a fit when silk proteins show up. Unlike some synthetics that trigger an immune response, think of it as your internal bouncer throwing out uninvited guests. Silk usually gets a friendly nod. This phenomenal biocompatibility is a massive win. Long before modern synthetics, silk threads were expertly used by ancient physicians to close wounds. In fact, if you were undergoing surgery centuries ago, chances are good the delicate stitches holding you together would have been spun from silkworm cocoons. This isn't just a quaint footnote. Silk sutures are still widely used, a testament to their strength and the body's tolerance. But scientists aren't content with just stitching you up. They're exploring silk's potential as a sophisticated drug delivery system. Imagine microscopic silk capsules, tiny enough to sprinkle over your morning cereal, though please don't. designed to carry drugs directly to diseased cells. These silk envelopes can be engineered to release their payload precisely where and when needed, minimizing side effects. It's like a tiny, biodegradable postman delivering bespoke medical packages right to the cellular doorstep. Then there's tissue engineering, where silk truly becomes the stuff of science fiction. Researchers are coaxing silk to form scaffolds intricate, porous structures that can guide new tissue growth. Picture a damaged knee ligament, a failing heart valve, or even nerve cells, all potentially regrown or repaired using silk-based matrices. Silk provides the perfect architectural framework, a biological blueprint, upon which your own cells can proliferate, eventually replacing the silk with your own regenerated tissue. It's an incredible symphony of biology and material science, where a humble worm's creation becomes the foundation for your body's self-repair. You feel it, don't you? That faint, almost imperceptible hum that resonates from the fabric itself as you run your fingers along a silken scarf, or perhaps the edge of a delicate gown. It's the whisper of an ancient journey, a quiet testament to a thread spun not by machines, but by the relentless, unassuming labor of a creature smaller than your pinky finger. You hold a piece of history, an echo of empresses and emperors, merchants and monks, a shimmering narrative woven from the very start. And honestly, if you were a silkworm, facing the prospect of being boiled to unspool your life's work, you probably wouldn't survive the existential dread, let alone the actual process. It's a remarkable, if slightly grim, transformation. You trace back to Empress Leizu, remember? Sitting beneath that mulberry tree, sipping tea, when a cocoon plopped right into her cup. A simple accident, yet one that unlocked centuries of wealth, power, and unparalleled beauty. From that moment, the delicate dance began. The painstaking cultivation of the mulberry leaf, the ravenous appetite of the silkworm, the patient waiting for the magical metamorphosis into a silken shroud. You picture the ancient Chinese looms, clattering gently, turning raw filament into garments so exquisite they were reserved for royalty. Each strand a testament to a guarded secret. China held onto that secret for so long, protecting it with fierce determination, ensuring their monopoly on luxury. For centuries, you realize, if you wanted the genuine article, you had to deal with the East. No knockoffs, no shortcuts. It was the original you can't sit with us fabric. Then, inevitably, the secret started to leak. Not just through daring smugglers, risking life and limb, stuffing silkworm eggs into hollowed-out staffs. A plan that, let's be honest, sounds like something out of a low-budget spy movie. But specifically, you recall those Byzantine monks, their stealthy success in the 6th century, supposedly tucking silkworm eggs into bamboo canes. Imagine their anxiety, crossing borders with potential empires literally nestled in their pockets. That single act, whether entirely true in its dramatic detail or embellished over time, fundamentally altered the course of global trade, initiating the slow erosion of China's absolute control. From Byzantium, silk's journey unfolded across the vast Islamic caliphates, where it wasn't just a commodity but an art form. Its beauty was elevated, patterns became intricate narratives, and its presence in mosques and palaces spoke of sophistication and spiritual reverence. You see it then, making its grand entrance into medieval European courts, a dazzling anomaly in a world of rough wool and linen. It wasn't just clothing, it was a statement. "Look at me," it seemed to whisper. "I'm rich enough to wear something that traveled halfway across the known world and required a small army of worms." The Renaissance saw Italian city-states like Venice and Florence emerge as powerhouses, their looms humming with a new energy weaving riches that funded art and architecture. Then came France, under figures like Louis XIV, transforming Lyon into the undisputed capital of high-fashion silk, setting trends that reverberated across the globe. The industrial age brought innovations like the jacquard loom, remember. Suddenly, complex patterns could be woven with greater speed, democratizing silk to some extent, though its allure as a luxury item remained untouched. Historians still argue whether the demand for silk primarily drove the expansion of the Silk Road, or if the road's existence simply facilitated its spread. But either way, silk was undeniably the superstar of ancient commerce, even when synthetics like rayon and nylon burst onto the scene in the 20th century, threatening to usurp silk's throne with their cheaper, more durable offerings. Natural silk endured. It found its niche, rediscovered its inherent value in luxury markets, sustainable fashion, and even cutting-edge medical applications. You think of silk sutures, so fine they practically disappear, or the incredible strength of spider silk inspiring new materials. And here's a curious little tidbit for your sleepy brain. During the American Civil War, silk was sometimes used as a material for hot air balloons because of its lightweight strength and ability to hold gas, proving its utility stretched far beyond fashion. The global trade today is still robust, with China once again a dominant force, alongside India and others, a testament to silk's cyclical journey back to its origins, yet now a globalized empire. This enduring fascination, this quiet reverence for silk, isn't just about its beauty or its strength. It's about the story it tells. Every thread carries the weight of history, the ingenuity of human endeavor, the sheer perseverance of a tiny creature. It's a reminder of how interconnected our world has always been, how a single serendipitous moment can ripple through millennia, shaping economies, inspiring art, and adorning royalty. And now, as the gentle hum of the past begins to fade, and the intricate patterns of silk's long journey slowly dissolve into the soft, comforting darkness around you, you can simply rest. Let the stories of empires and humble worms, of secret roots and daring escapes, drift away like wisps of fine silk caught on a gentle breeze. The thread, so strong and so delicate, has woven its incredible tale, connecting us to a timeless legacy, a reminder that even the smallest, most unassuming beginnings can lead to the most extraordinary and lasting beauty. Your own thoughts, like silken strands, can now unwind and settle, finding their quiet place in the soft fabric of dreams. There's nothing left to worry about, no more secrets to guard, no more long journeys to undertake tonight. Just a peaceful stillness, a sense of calm that settles gently over you, like the softest silk against your skin. Allow yourself to be enveloped by this tranquility, letting your mind quieten, your breath deepen, and your body relax completely into the quiet comfort of the moment. The journey of the silk, and your journey through its history, now gently concludes. Sweet dreams.